Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. Today we're talking with Shelley Teeples. Shelley, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks for being with us.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I was born here, actually. My dad taught at Dixie College, and then we moved when I was 5, and I grew up in Orem, Utah. I have 2 children, and I was a single mom for 18 years. During that time, I got my degree in psychology and became very interested in victim services, social work. I've always really liked people. And so, I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I'm dating myself, I don't know if they still do this, Wednesday's Child that they used to show on the air. I remember, and I'm sure part of it was just pregnancy hormones, but I remember just bawling, thinking, oh, you can come live with me, But I think, I've always been interested in wanting to help other people who were not as fortunate. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be raised in a home where I was loved, and there were boundaries and there were expectations, and not all kids are that fortunate. So that really kind of helped me define what area of study I went into and what I wanted to do when I grew up. So,
have you grown up?
I don't know. That's a
I've
question
never
for my
grown up.
parents. I don't know. I don't think we ever do. I mean, I feel like anybody that thinks we're done developing at 40, 50, 60, 70 is, we keep growing, we keep learning, and so I think we're constantly growing up.
I graduated from the College of Southern Utah in Cedar City 100 years ago. And one of the brochures they had on the back of it, it said, "Life is not a static state of being, but a continuous process of becoming." So in a sense, we never fully grow up. I've kept that all my life. And
it is so true. It's so true. Just when I think that I've got something figured out, then I stumble across new information. And find myself going, oh, I was. But yeah, so I ended up here in St. George about 2 years ago. I applied for a position that, I applied for a position that my husband wanted me to get. And
you don't follow what he wants, do you?
Well, he loves the desert. He thinks it's magic.
That's all right then.
And he restores old cars, and so it's much nicer to work on warm metal than cold metal. So, and I thought, okay, I'll apply. We had gotten married a month before I got this job, and
how did you meet him?
So okay.
I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. Because I skipped. My kids and I lived in Richfield. I moved there for a job as a dental lab technician, and I worked there for 2 years. I didn't have any relatives there. My kids were little, and then the lab laid like 75% of us off. By then I'd bought a house, and I did not want to move my kids again. So I went to school through the extension program, and I graduated from Utah State. But I went, but I attended on the Richfield Snow campus. Anyway, I met my husband. Actually, I met his 3 boys several years before I met him, or a couple years, because they played with my son, and they would come sleep over, and they'd call me mom, and my husband was also a single parent raising his boys by himself, and so my son would say, "I love you, Mom," and then they'd say, "I love you, Mom," and anyway,
so he sent his boys over.
Well, and I was thinking, who's your father? I mean, he doesn't know me. But then as I got to know Jeff, he'd say, we'd get a phone call, we'd be at a movie, and he'd say, kid would say, "Can I sleep over at Nathan's?" And he'd say, "Yeah, sure." And I'm like, "Wait, who's Nathan? Who's his parents? Let's drive by there. Do we have a number? Have you met them?" And in his mind, it was just like, whew, one down, two to go. But so I knew his boys before I met Jeff. And anyway, we dated 8 years because we were both raising our kids by ourselves, and I didn't really want to. I liked him and loved him enough that I did not want to subject him to my teenagers. And I also didn't, we had different parenting styles, so I didn't want to kind of try and homogenize the family and the parenting styles because I knew it would cause a rift. So we got teased a lot in this little small town of Ridgefield. When are you guys going to get married? And we always said when our kids are gone, as soon as our kids are gone. So we got married the morning that both of our youngest sons graduated from high school. So, and then a month later, I got a job down here working at the Children's Justice Center. So it was a lot of change to go from being a single mother for years and him being a single father to being married again and empty nesters and moving and selling 2 homes, and it was kind of a crazy ride that first year, but it's been great.
Sounds exciting. Mm-hmm. Well, tell me about what you do now.
So, I have the fortune of being the director of the Washington County Children's Justice Center. And for those people that don't know what that is, it is a place where we conduct forensic interviews on children who have either disclosed or it is suspected that they have been abused sexually, physically, neglected, exposed to drugs. There's a number of reasons kids come to our center to be interviewed. Our center opened its doors in 1997, and it was just a little house at the time that it opened. Since then, we have the previous director, Patricia Sheffield, oversaw the building, the construction of a brand new building that was designed to grow with the population of St. George and to facilitate other services. And that's been my goal since I've been here, is to provide more services on site so that families really, it's not just about the interview, it's not just about the child telling their story, but it's also about getting help, the process of healing. So we are, right now, our big project is our medical exam center, or our medical exam room. And we've had, because of generous donations from community, business owners and construction companies, we've had the labor and the materials donated for that room. We've also had Intermountain Health step in and give us some overstock supplies. The LDS Church is purchasing a medical exam table for us, and also a colposcope, a new colposcope. But what I foresee is that we're going to be able to conduct a lot more free medical exams for kids, where we can test them. My work, there's a lot of darkness to this job, and I don't want to be too graphic, but some of these kids need to be treated for sexually transmitted diseases. Some of these kids, come in and their abuse was recent, and we're able to collect important evidence that helps in the prosecution of their perpetrator. And so it's a really necessary and helpful for the family and the child, but also helpful for prosecution. So I hope my goal next year is to be able to fund an on-site mental health therapist, so that kids can also, get a jump start on some therapy once they've come to our center. I guess should go back a little bit and kind of explain the process of what happens when a family, when it comes out that a child's been abused, depending on what kind of abuse it is. With physical abuse, there's a lot of times that we can't do the interview at the center, because if it's physical abuse, a lot of times it's an in-home perpetrator committing that abuse. So sometimes our investigators have to go to the schools to conduct that investigation. But we do see primarily sexual abuse cases.
How old are the children generally?
We avoid interviewing kids younger than 2 because they can't.
Right.
I mean, developmentally, they're unable to talk about time, talk about abstract memory, or they're developmentally and language challenged. So we don't get really good interviews from little kids that are that old. But I remember, and I'm sure that this number has, I'm sure that it's changed, but as of about 10 years or so, I used to go in the schools and do assemblies about protecting yourself from abuse and sexual violence. And back then, the record for Utah, the youngest child that had been sexually abused was 3 days old. So I'm sure that that's changed in 10 years. So it's not that population isn't being abused. It's just we don't tend to see kids that young because we can't get a good interview. We certainly, when we find out about a child that's been abused, we try to follow up with them and help the families get medical attention for the child and any other resources they need to move forward and get in a better circumstance for that child. But anyway, so when say a teacher says, this kid came to me today and said that he has been being sexually abused by his uncle. Teacher would call that in, and they'd call it into law enforcement or DCFS, Department of Child and Family Services, their hotline. At that time, our investigators would coordinate a time for this child to come in and tell their story. We have a forensic interview specialist, which is great. We're one of, I think, 4 now. We were one of 3 pilot programs last year to try a forensic interview specialist program, and we've had great results. Our disclosure rates have gone up. We've had solid interviews that are that can be defended in court. But anyway, our investigators will coordinate with our forensic interview specialist on a time, and then our team, all of the investigators, our medical staff, our victim advocate, will all kind of converge at the center and discuss the case a few minutes before the family arrives, so that the victim advocate knows if there's any, special circumstances. Say, this is mom's bringing the child in and the child was abused by her biological brother and she's very protective of her brother. There's a lot of dynamics that it's helpful to understand the story or as much about the family before they come in, so we can do the best job we can for them and be sensitive to their needs and their concerns. Anyway, the victim advocate will offer them a treat, offer them a cold drink, and get them comfortable in a setting that really feels like home. There's toys there, there's a fish tank, there's books, things to help the child feel at ease. And then the interview takes place, and our investigators watch the interview from a separate room. The forensic interviewer goes into our interview room and conducts that interview. The way she conducts those interviews is she doesn't educate, she doesn't lead. She uses episodic memory recall, which is basically having the child tell the story. Tell me everything about that. do you know why you're here? Tell me everything about that. And then when the child discloses, well, you know, then he touched me here. Okay, you said he touched you here. Tell me everything about that. So that it's the child being able, it's the child's words, not our investigators' words. And that can be, you know, such a powerful tool in the prosecution of a perpetrator, because what we can do is we can take that recorded audio-video interview, and rather than having a child take the stand in a preliminary hearing where evidence is brought forward and the judge decides if there's probable cause that it needs to be bound over for trial, that a lot of times will do a couple of things. First of all, it will encourage the perpetrator to take a plea deal, because they will watch that interview and think, oh man, a jury's going to hang me if I go through a trial. And then most importantly, I think, is it prevents, in most cases, from a child having to take the stand. The last thing a prosecutor ever wants to do is put a child victim on the stand, because that causes trauma. I mean,
It's
the
another traumatic
re-traumatization.
event,
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You know, my previous job, I would have to, you know, I had a couple of cases where I sat on the stand with the child as they told their story, and I held their hand, and it was, I mean, I had one little girl that just broke down, and her dad was just trying to intimidate her and trying to say, I can't hear her. And she was just this timid little thing anyway, but he was just, you know, he was just harassing her, and she was already terrified to tell her story to all of these grown-ups that she didn't know. And so to be able to prevent a child from having to do that is, I think, one of the most important things that we do at our center is better outcomes for victims. But anyway, we make sure that we give those recordings to prosecution, the investigators. After the interview, our victim advocate will play with the child, or if it's a teenager, you know, make them comfortable, turn on a video or the television. And then the CPS worker, Child Protective Service worker, and law enforcement officer will take the parent into the room to discuss. It might be anything. I mean, it can come up in the interview that the parent knows about the abuse. We've had several of those cases where CPS tries to scare the, you know, scare the offending parent and say, look, you know about this abuse. This is failure to protect your child. And then other times, you know, the parents just had no idea anything was going on, and, you know, they come out sobbing and feeling guilty, and all the emotions that you go through as a parent if you knew your child had been hurt. So after that, our victim advocate continues to have a relationship with these families and check in with them. Our medical staff contacts them and talks to them about the benefits of a free medical exam. And then we just follow those cases until they are prosecuted, or, I mean, until there's a resolution to those cases. Whether it gets denied because we lack evidence, or because the child didn't give a good disclosure, or if it goes all the way to a jury trial, that victim advocate and our center and our medical staff stay on top of it. Twice a month we meet as a multidisciplinary team. So anybody involved in the case, if we have a juvenile probation officer, if we have you know, family services involved, if we invite everybody to the table, and we go over every single open case that we have on a child, so that none of them fall through the cracks, so that we are able to say, what's going on, what's taking so long, have we charged, has the perpetrator been arrested, what was he charged with? And then we will report that information back to the state, who helps to fund our organization. That's where some of our funding comes from. So.
What responsibility do we have as citizens to report something that we see that might be happening?
In the state of Utah, adults are required. There's mandatory reporting. If you suspect that a child is being abused, or if you or if a child tells you they're being abused, you have an obligation by law and to that child to report it, so that they can, hopefully we can help alleviate the situation, get to the bottom of it, and get that child some help. And the thing about pedophiles, the thing about people that hurt children that way, is they don't just hurt one child. These people are, they're predators, and they're opportunistic, and they place themselves in positions within the community that gives them access to children. They are master manipulators. They know how to talk to a child. Usually their MO is that they've never been in trouble before until they get caught. And by the time they get caught, they have a list of victims. They prey on children that are vulnerable, that they can threaten, that they can groom, that they can that they can use their cunning on to say, this is our little secret, and here's your toy for the day. And there's just a number of ways a child, a young child, even a teenager, is no match for a child molester. It's what they do. And so we are obligated to report those crimes. If you suspect it, call law enforcement. If you don't know who to call law enforcement. Just call their non-emergency number and say, I'd like to report child abuse. And they'll take it from there. Or you can call the Child Abuse Hotline, which is a dispatch for the Department of Child and Family Services, and they will also connect with law enforcement to investigate the crime or the alleged crime. So we're all obligated, and if you suspect, follow your gut. That has been my truth, is that when I have had an uneasy feeling about a person or a child's behavior, it's more often been right than not that something's going on with that child. So I mean, in people, if you've got questions, call us at the Washington County Children's Justice Center. We'll walk you through it. We encourage our community members to come take tours of our center. We're always happy to show the community, because our community supports us so much, and we rely so heavily on donations to keep the lights on. So we want our community to come in and see this great facility that we have that serves our child population here in the county. But we'll take you on a tour. We do interviews, scheduled interviews on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes we have to do emergency interviews on different days, but Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we always open, we have an open door, and we love to give people a tour to see what we do.
Where is this, and how can they find out about it?
It is, it's 463 East, 500 South in St. George. It's right by the temple and kitty corner to the old hospital. If you know where the Jubilee House is, we're right next door to the Jubilee House. So,
one thing I never could understand is this association these people have, man, boy, something or other.
So
it's horrible.
It is. It's a deviant thinking, and we have learned from research and time that you can't treat that deviation. I mean, you can treat an offender. Most of them, you can't take that thinking away from them. You can train them to control their impulses, but we have, we don't have great success when it comes to rehabilitating sex offenders. And what we're also finding is, we're so good about, as teachers and parents, saying, if somebody tries to touch you, these are your private areas, you come tell me, you say no, scream, yell. What we're not doing is we're not teaching our kids to not touch other kids. What we're finding is that pedophiles usually start offending when they're very young, at a very young age, and either the behavior doesn't get stopped, but they grow an attraction to those that they perpetrate on. If you're starting to offend at a young age, you're going to have to pick a child that's smaller than you or weaker than you, and that's what we're seeing. Is the myth has been anybody that gets abused is going to then become a pedophile later in life, and that's simply not true. Most people that have experienced child abuse do not go on to conduct their own deviant behavior. It is those kids that don't have boundaries and don't get treatment that continue.
We got 2 minutes left. What's your final word?
My final word, report abuse if you see it. Be aware that it's out there. It's very prominent in our. It's very. We have a lot of cases in our area. So far this year, after today, we will have had 223 interviews this calendar year for abuse.
In 7 months.
In 7 months, yes. And those really don't account for a lot of the physical abuse in the area. But also, stop by our center. We really rely on donations. We're having an apple drive. We're selling apples around November and December. It's a bushel of apples. It's approximately $38 for a bushel. They're great Christmas presents, great for Thanksgiving, and they help to support our center and the activities that we do. We need any household items that you want to donate. We run just like a house: toilet paper, paper towels, cleaning supplies, all of that. We really appreciate the generosity of this community. It's been amazing to see how much the community gets behind us, so I'd like to thank everybody for that.
Tell us where it is one more time.
463 East, 500 South, St. George, Utah. And you can also visit our website. It's wccjc.com.
wccjc.com.
Standing for Washington County Children's Justice Center.
Well, that's simple enough to remember.
Yeah.
And teach your children not to touch other children.
You know what? I have to make a correction. It's the other way around. CJC, WC. Sorry about that. So the WC is on the back end. But yes, teach your kids not to touch other kids.
And don't let them touch you.
Absolutely. No sleepovers.
No sleepovers.
No sleepovers.
That's the worst thing I've ever seen.
Well,
it can be fun, but it can get out of control.
You cannot imagine the number of interviews that start out with, well, I was at a sleepover.
Well, Shelley, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
This is Lane Ronno from the campus of Dixie State University. We've been talking with Shelley Teeples. Thank you for being with us on A Story to Tell.